Kathryn, thank you so much for being here today. To start out, can you just give a quick Cliff's Notes version of who Kathryn Bertine is for folks who are listening who maybe don't know?
Oh, that's a great question. Hello, listeners. I suppose I define myself as an author, activist, and athlete. I think those three titles have played well into my journey. And I feel fortunate to have written a few books. I now run a foundation out here in Tucson, which I'm sure we'll get into. And, I really am pretty passionate about fighting for all things equality and equity when it comes to women and moving the dial forward for us, which sometimes remains stuck in the past. So those are areas that I would say are synonymous with who I am and what I do.
Very good. Can you tell us about how you got into road cycling? And this is a question I ask most of my podcast listeners, how they got into cycling. But you have a very unique story. I think this is going to be probably the best story we've had to answer this question.
Yes, I got into road cycling through a journalism assignment with ESPN. Back when I was working for ESPN, I had a couple different stints with them, but specifically the job I was working from 2006 to 2008, I was a writer and a reporter for their Page Two on ESPN Online. And the assignment that I was tasked with was see if I could get to the Summer Olympics in any sport possible. And this was really a truly life-changing assignment because one thing led to another that led to another and really changed my life in so many ways. So I will shorten that story. If you want the long story, it's in a book called As Good as Gold, and that'll take you through the entire 2 year journey. But where cycling came into play was that before this assignment, I'd been a triathlete. And it turned out that of the three disciplines of swim, bike, and run, in triathlon, cycling was my strongest event. And so I thought, okay, let me explore cycling as this ESPN story unfolded. The reason I didn't stick with triathlon was because I did distance triathlons, the Ironman and half Ironman, and those were not Olympic sports. And the Olympic triathlon is a wonderful event, but it's very, very fast, and I didn't have the speed that the Olympic distance triathletes had. So that was out the window as a potential sport. But cycling, that's where I kind of said, I wonder if I might be okay at this road cycling thing. And I really have no idea how to go about that. And through this assignment, I was introduced first of all things to track cycling. And it was the track cycling coach that educated me on road cycling. Said, if you want to try this, here's what you have to do. And he explained the steps for me, starting with Cat 4 and moving up to Cat 1 and how you would qualify for nationals. We didn't even have Cat 5 for women back then.
Mhm.
So that was the journey. And long story short, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, but not too much, by this time in the journey, the ESPN journey, I only had about a year to see if I could make the 2008 games. And I did not qualify in road cycling. But what's crazy is that I came very, very close. And what's even crazier is that I personally fell in love with the sport. I'm like, oh, this cycling thing is awesome. And I wanted to keep doing it well after the assignment ended. So that's what I did, and I was like, I wonder if I could actually get up to the professional level in cycling. I'm all in. I love this. And when the ESPN assignment was over, I just kept going. And it also played a huge factor in my life when I was road cycling very actively that first year. I had some pretty amazing opportunities to go race in different countries. I did a lot of UCI level races, and I saw firsthand how many inequities there were in women's cycling. That women usually raced half the distance that the men had, that if it was a professional race, the prize money was pennies on the dollar to the men's prize
Mhm.
purse. And the crazy part that women weren't even invited to all the major races that men dominated in cycling. So none of that made sense to me. And I credit the sports that I did long before, like triathlon. And then when I was a kid, I was a figure skater and I was a rower, I was a runner. And the one thing that all of those held in common was equal opportunities for men and women. Especially triathlon, where men and women raced the exact same distances and had the same prize purse at the professional level. So stepping over into cycling, I was like, this is nuts. How
Yeah.
antiquated is this sport? So that's a very long answer to how I got involved and then the doors that it opened. And yeah, life really truly changed from that assignment.
Yeah. I think that's the most remarkable story because most people don't think that as a Cat 4 cyclist, I'm going to somehow become an Olympian, right?
Right.
So
Right.
it's an amazing story. And that just makes me wonder, do you think most people are just setting like their goals and their dreams too low?
Great question. And I think yes. And I also think, unfortunately, it's a factor of our gender. I think a lot of women will actually set their sights too low. Um, I've seen this time and time again, and it's usually systemic. And most of the times, the woman doesn't even know it. And I can give like the race length, for example. Let's say there's a race where men race 100 miles and women only race 50. And you might ask a number of women, well, don't you want to also race 100 miles? And their first thing is that, well, I can't, I've never done that distance. The men do that, but the women, I can't. So they haven't been educated to the fact of like, yes, you absolutely can. And we can cite
Yeah.
other sports. They're just kind of tapped out at that 50 marker, right? Whereas had it always been equal for men and women, they would not be feeling that way. So sometimes, yeah, women hold themselves back. I've seen far too many examples of that, and I think age also has something to do with it. I got into road cycling quite late. When this assignment came about for ESPN, I was 31 years old when I first got on a road bike. So I went from 31 Cat 4 to 41 being at the World Tour as a professional racer and having my best season. So it's doable, but I have to say that had I started this assignment at 21, I might have had more longevity in the sport, but also maybe not, because at 21, I also would have accepted the system as the way it
Hmm.
was.
Yeah.
I think we do in our early 20s. It's like, oh, okay, well, I have to do this, and this is what the rules are. Therefore, I'm not questioning the rules. And so, me being, in my early 30s, and also being a journalist where our main lifeline is asking the question, why? Why is it like this? Why?
Yeah.
And I think that, bode very well for questioning the status quo, is having a little bit of maturity, a little bit, and asking why, and not having any worthwhile answers for
Yeah.
all the broken parts. So,
It's, I mean, there's so much science now that shows that women get stronger, like around 40 is when we start peaking in ultra endurance sports. And I think that's very much been accepted in other sports like ultra running. Um, and that, why do you think that cycling is behind in kind of that messaging?
I can tell you it's definitely finally more advanced in cycling than it was when I started. But I agree with you that there was still this old, outdated outlook that as women age, they'll get slower. And unfortunately, that was capped, in the early 30s back then. But now, finally, because of the amazing talents we've seen, for example, Kristen Armstrong, who won 3 gold medals consecutively in the time trial,
Hmm.
and she was that last gold medal was somewhere around 40 or 41. She really helped put that imprint of like, wait, women are getting better through their 30s and their 40s. So too with cyclist Annemiek van Vleuten. She had one of her best seasons at 40. And we're seeing that finally trickle down into the pro peloton. And the biology part also makes a lot of sense, that women have greater endurance often than men do. And the
Hmm.
longer you extend a race, you'll see women rise to the front. We've seen that, like you mentioned, in ultra running and also ultra triathlons that they
Hmm.
have. And it's no longer a surprise, at least in the physiologist world.
Yeah.
So it's really taking the data that already currently exists and bringing it over to the masses so that that stereotype of women being old and outdated at 40 is finally shattered.
Yeah. You
And I love
retired
it.
at 41. Had it not
Yes.
been for like team politics and injuries, do you think physically you could have kept going?
Probably. I think for me, the big decision to retire too at 41 or at the end of my 41st year
Hmm.
was also that I had mentally, physically, and emotionally done what I wanted to do in
Hmm.
cycling. So for me, that decision to retire, what I love is that that was 100% my choice, as opposed to leaving it up to the establishment to say, you're
Hmm.
too old or you're too slow. I'm just not going to give you a contract. I'm like, you don't get to make that choice. I'll make that choice.
Yeah.
But physically, absolutely. I easily could have gone another year and had the same results or better. But I really love the idea of being like, I'm good. I also fell on my head that year. So, that was part of the urge to say, I'm going to pivot away from this sport while I'm so lucky to be here, to be alive, all of that. So it was a dual factor of making that decision. But we still see very, very strong women in the sport later in life. And I'm excited to watch that trend move upward
Hmm.
in age. And, sometimes you'll see some of the most talented, incredible athletes in their early to mid 20s or anytime throughout their 20s, and they get burned out by the time they're in their 30s. That it does happen. So we have to remember that being able to hold a career into your 30s and 40s goes a long way in terms
Sure.
of the mental toughness too, and not burning out, and the physically watching what happens when you train right and what
Mm.
happens when you
Yeah.
don't.
You already mentioned your transition kind of into activism, which began with trying to get women into the Tour de France. Why was that so important to you?
To me, the fact that, and we're going back now to about 2009, when I started as a journalist doing more research on the Tour de France, and I had these aspirations of being pro, and I saw that there was not a women's field at the Tour de France. It made no sense to me as both a journalist and an athlete. I'm
Mhm.
like, hold on, because and I talk about this in the book too, that 99% of the population knows that the Tour de France is a bike race in France. It has that much notoriety, that
Mhm.
much fame. So the fact that women weren't there was astounding to me. And I looked deeper into it and I saw that, wait a minute, gets even crazier. We had a women's field in the Tour de France from 1984 to 89. And we also had a women's Tour de France in 1955. So this now more than ever didn't add up.
Mhm.
Where has it gone? Especially as we're seeing the rise during, the 2000s of women's sports and media coverage. It's been building and building a little bit more each year. Luckily, a lot recently, but it still made no sense to me, like of there not being a women's tour. So that's when I started, asking all the whys and reaching out to ASO, which is the parent company that puts on the Tour de France, saying, there are no women here. We need to bring it back. I have a business proposal for you. Can we sit down and talk about this? And I heard just nothing for like 5 years.
Mhm.
And I'll come back to that. But to answer directly your question, the reason it mattered so much for the Tour de France is that for cycling, um, we have the Tour de France as our pinnacle event. Whereas, the Olympics, the pinnacle event for all sports, that's the major league. We have Wimbledon for tennis. We have Ironman Kona for world championships of triathlon, et cetera. Pick a sport, and whatever the top of that sport is, you will find women.
Yeah.
So the fact that that didn't exist at the Tour de France, I knew that that's where we had to initiate change so that it could have the trickle down effect. Well, if there are women at the Tour de France, we're going to have them everywhere else in the cycling hierarchy of
Mhm.
races. So it made sense to me. Let's shoot for change at the very, very top. Um, and so that really is the true answer of why is it so important we have women at that race.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that journey to getting women there?
Oh, yes. I can tell you about that journey, which happens to be a 400-page book. The full story, which is in Stand, will go through all the harrowing details, and I know that we'll touch upon many of those today, Kristen. But the journey was, as I mentioned earlier, I started reaching out to ASO and asking questions. Can we have a meeting? I actually wrote a full-on business proposal, 20-page proposal of why it was not only the right thing to do socially, but the smart thing to do economically. That when you include women, your ROI is going to go up. So I thought that made perfect sense. And they would see the light and be like, yes, yes, Kathryn, let's have a meeting with you. But what they saw, I think, was some woman in the United States who's not famous and not even a blip on the professional cycling scene. Like, why would we spend time communicating with this chick?
Yeah.
So,
I think it's so ballsy that you sent that though.
oh, what do you have to lose, right? What do you have to lose? So, I did. So I sent that stuff, and then I didn't hear anything for quite, gosh, and then let me do the math on this. Yeah, we didn't hear anything for almost 5 years. And now let's talk about that. Fast forward, in 2012, I actually got my first professional contract. Colavita Pro Cycling, which was a big team here in the United States that ran for many years. Sometimes they had a men's team in addition to a women's team. It was one of the most sought after pro teams to be on back in the day. And I was so fortunate. I got that pro contract at the age of 37. And what also happened that year, 2012, I had been hired in 2011 back to ESPN. There was a bit of a hiring hiatus during the financial crisis we had in 09, 08, 09, 2010. But I was back in 2011. And I thought, okay, now it's 2012. I have a pro contract where I'm going to be at all the best races, and I have a job with ESPN. Let me try reaching out to ASO now that I have some clout. Still, I hear nothing in that 2011, early 2012. And then I had an idea. I'm like, you know what? Let me pitch a documentary idea to ESPN, and maybe if they get on board, maybe then ASO will listen, to this stuff that we're talking about. So, long story short, I pitched a documentary on women's cycling to ESPN, and I had a female boss at the time, and she said, "Oh, Kathryn, does anyone even watch women's cycling?" And I said, well, no, that's the problem. They
How would
can't.
they?
Yeah, there's no way for them to visibly see this. But we're ESPN. We have the ability to change that through documentaries, through coverage. So let's get on board. And then, yes, women will be able to watch, or people will be able to watch
Yeah.
women in bike racing. So with that, though, because ESPN, but I also say it's not just the entire company of ESPN. All it was one woman squashing the idea. And people need to remember that too, that every corporation, you're going to be up against individual people. And if you can make them see the light, then great. But, don't think of it as a giant company. Think of it as individual stepping stones. And when this woman who did represent ESPN said, no, we're not going to move forward with this, that really flipped this internal switch for me that said, okay, if ESPN's not going to do it, I am, and to actually say that idea out loud and then be like, okay, I have just publicly declared I'm going to make a film on women's pro cycling, and I don't technically know how to do that. What I do know how to do is write. That's my background. So now if I can hire a cinematographer, we can move forward with this idea. But at the time, things like Indiegogo and Kickstarter were very new, the whole idea of crowdfunding. And I had somebody educate me on that, and I'd never heard of it. I'm like, oh, and then the wheels kind of turned in my brain. I was like, wait a minute, maybe I fully believe there are enough people out there in the world who are so interested in cycling. And from all the international races I had done at that point, I knew that we had a huge fan base worldwide. So what if we floated this out on crowdfunding and and made this movie ourselves, funded by the fans that really do believe in women's cycling. And sure enough, we were able to raise our whole budget for this independent film from having been the one who launched the Indiegogo, I had all the stats. So we had 16 different countries funding us, and the biggest were U.S., Canada, Great Britain, and Australia, because they had big presence in cycling, and I had direct ties to some of them. But of course, we had all the small European nations jumping in too. But it was so awesome to see.
Yeah.
The best was the statistic that the donors to this project were 50% men, 50%. And that was what I really needed to see.
Yeah.
That, it wasn't just a bunch of screaming women funding a film that, that whole stereotype.
Right.
And I was like, no, it was the men of cycling who thought that sport was awesome. They were equally excited to see women race. So,
Yeah.
so that was, that we started that. Now, keep in
Folks
mind,
listening who don't know that documentary, I don't think you ever mentioned the name. It's called Half the Road. You can still go watch it, and I'd highly recommend it.
Thank you. Half the Road is out there. I can tell you specifically, it is on iTunes. It's on Vimeo worldwide, because sometimes iTunes doesn't compute with other countries. And then it does that funny thing on Amazon Prime where it'll drift in and out. Like it'll be there and then it goes away and then it comes back. And it sometimes depends on where you are in the world. But it's all out there. If you Google Half the Road, you will find it. And I hope you watch it. It's nice to know that it's still so relevant, even though the film is now, 11 years old. There's still so many truths in that film that we need to grasp and change. So that was that. Yeah, on the timeline of this. So I find a filmmaking partner, Kevin Tokstad and I, and we dive into making this film. And of course, like any film, it takes approximately 2 years from when we first started shooting to when it released in the theater in January of 2014. It took 2 years. But here's where the remarkable part happened that parlays over to the women at the Tour de France. I now had access to the best athletes in the world. And during my generation of cycling, that was Marianne Vos, that was Emma Pooley. And I also love that Marianne Vos is still crushing it.
She is.
Right? So, who else do we have? We had Kristen Armstrong, Ina Teutenberg. We have so many incredible women in this film that are either still in the sport in some way or helping it grow. And it was being able to sit down and interview them and for them to trust me too and to say, okay, I've heard of this lady. I don't really know who she is, but it seems like she has cycling's best interest at heart, and they did sit down and talk with me. And that's a big deal. Not everybody wants to do that if they're unsure.
Sure.
I mean, God, I had a team manager who thought I was making a film about myself. And that was a really difficult, when you're making a film and you don't yet have anything to show as proof, you're in the stages, and she just assumed, oh, it's all about me and it's a, giant selfie movie. And I couldn't be further from the truth. I'm like, nope, that's not it.
Yeah.
But to try to have people understand that when you're yet to possess anything tangible to show them. Where things changed for the better was when we were finally able to have enough material and we could shoot a proper trailer for the film. And then you'd see all these amazing superstars. And then we did a second round of fundraising and then people got it. They're like, oh, it's awesome. I can't wait to see this. That's when things finally changed for the better. That's also when I knew, having interviewed so many of these cycling celebrities, I asked everybody the same question, whether they were a fledgling neo-pro cyclist or they were a seasoned athlete. I said, do you want to race the Tour de France someday? And they all said yes. Maybe a few track cyclists who are like, that's really long. I don't know. But yes, I support a women's Tour de France. That was the answer we were getting. I'm like, okay, now we have something. And that's when I personally reached out to Emma Pooley and to Marianne Vos, and I had a triathlete friend too, Chrissy Wellington, four-time world champion triathlete. She wanted to be part of this. I said, if we form a little bit of a subcommittee, a union, a group of pressure, what if we now go after ASO to create this change to bring women into the Tour de France? They're all like, yep, let's do this
Mhm.
together. Now I knew that we had the traction of people that ASO would have to listen to and they couldn't ignore.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's important too to highlight my role, even though I was not yet a famous pro cyclist and I didn't have Olympic medals, I didn't have world championship
Mhm.
results. Um, I was a very important cog in that wheel. I had the logistics, I had the ability to write decent
Mhm.
sentences, and I had the operational side of this. And I think it's so important that everyone knows that they too can create change if they play, their strongest role in the wheel of progress,
Yeah.
right? For me, that was it. So, as I say in Stand, they're the superstars, and I was the bus driver of the superstars.
Mhm.
That all worked. So long story short, now we're in 2013, right? This year, it's about 6 months before the film Half the Road comes out. But by this time, we'd formed this committee. And we decided we would launch a petition on change.org for women's re-inclusion. We would also launch a website with a manifesto of how we were going to go about, fighting for this change and why it was smart and the right thing to do, all the financial reasons. What we needed in hand was something to where everyone who was going to be a naysayer, we could redirect them to the website rather than have to sit there and argue with the entire internet,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just about launching a petition, it's about having a plan of action, all of this. And the most important part of our petition was, yes, asking for a women's race at the Tour, but also saying we would like to help you build this. Can we sit down
Mhm.
and have a meeting with you? That was the objective, is what is step two? And that would be sitting down with ASO and making this change happen
Yeah.
with them. So I think that's a really important thing to bring up, that if you're trying to create change, don't put it all on the other person of like, I want a women's Tour de France. You make it happen. No, if
Mhm.
you're really invested, you make it happen
Yeah.
together and you form that pathway. Otherwise, you're likely to run into a roadblock where the other side is like, oh, it looks like a lot of work. I'm not going to do it. So offer to do it with them. And that's a big help, right? So we launched the petition in July of 2013, specifically during the Men's Tour de France, because we knew it would gain publicity and
Right.
traction. And sure enough, that's what happened. And back in the early days of change.org, it went viral. It went viral to the extent that we were one of change.org's top 3 petitions of
Wow.
2013, and huge, and back then going viral was garnering about 100,000 signatures. Now it's up in the millions.
Okay.
uh, back then it was huge. So this was really, really exciting. And then the most important part was the press took note and the media was on our side. They're
Yeah.
like, yeah, we want to see this too. And then what happened first was that ASO ignored us. And so the media would go to ASO, Christian Prudhomme, the race director of the Tour de France, and they would ask him during the men's Tour de France, "What do you think about this petition?" And he would get all huffy, like, "Oh, I don't have time for this," And so we're like,
Yeah.
but now it's record saying that, and this is great. And sure enough, more and more media, So finally, what happened was they did get in touch with us behind, closed doors, basically saying, "Look, we'll meet with you, but in private. No one can know about this. We're going to police your social media so you don't let anyone know." And we set up a meeting for that October, and that's when change happened. And we went in there fully, all of us on our pressure group. We named Le Tour Entier, which means the whole tour, as in women belong at the whole tour. And it was Emma Pooley's brilliance that we give it a French name because they're French, so let's put it on their level. And we went in, all Le Tour Entier members went in, sat down with Christian and the board, basically, of ASO. And what's comical is we did have to convince them that people would watch.
Yeah.
Women wanted this,
Yeah.
and I'll never forget the meeting started out with what I call the great finger wag, which was Christian Prudhomme waving his finger at us saying, "You should not have done that petition." And we were all kind of snickering, like, well, but here we are.
Yeah. Right. It
Because of that.
worked.
So that was fun. But then after, he kind of admonished us to, posture and peacock, as they say, things kind of settled down, and he did listen. And it's very important to know too that when we fought for women's inclusion at the Tour de France, we fought for the whole thing, all 3 weeks. You don't go into something and fight for halfway, just for that earlier reference I gave. Oh, we want to do the Tour de France, but we're women, so only half of it. That's not equal.
Yeah.
No, you know. So we went in say we want women to do the whole thing, and the best part is we had proof. Women did that in the 80s. They shortened some of the women's races, but specifically so that the men and the women wouldn't overlap. But that's the only reason to shorten it, and not by a whole lot, just by a little bit.
Yeah.
So we were like, it's already been done. We don't need to prove that. We
Yeah.
know that. Do it again. And it took a lot for them to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We are going to do one day in 2014. Where at that point, that was basically about 7 months away from when we had the meeting at the end of 2013. Said we're going to do one day as a test event and see how it goes, see if anybody will watch. And we're like, okay, we got our foot in the door, but we said specifically, if you're doing one day this year, then you're going to want to add 3 to 5 days incrementally each year because it will be proven. Yeah, not just in the number of the viewers, but the amount of sponsorship exposure. People are going to want in on this, and it's going to be awesome. So, and it was.
Yeah.
So, jumping up to 2014, but it's also very specific to note that, Emma and Chrissy and Marianne and we really built that race behind the scenes to make sure we did all of the programming for it. I sat down with Universal Sports in the US to make sure that they would show it. Other athletes did that throughout. And sure enough, we were broadcast in something like on 57 different networks that covered 125 countries throughout the world. And it was a huge success and it was amazing. And of course, it tuned into the many millions. And ASO was like, oh my God, people really did watch. And yeah, yeah, we told you so.
Right.
They made a terrible mistake though. And what they did was, oh, that was so great. We're going to do it next year, one day.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, 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 hold on now. We had a promise, we'll talk about that in a second. But to go back in time, it's the race was called La Course by Tour de France. And the most important part about this was that it was the Tour de France, that it shared the same name
Yeah.
as, as the men's race. And it happened, the women's one-day event was on the Champs-Élysées, the same day that the men's race finished there, the last day of their tour. We shared the same site. It was amazing. The fans came out in droves. It was incredible. So La Course by Tour de France was huge because we had the naming rights back. And I should mention, too, that what happened when they canceled the women's race after 1989, which was called Tour de France Féminine back then. And the women were like, well, we'll go make our own race and we'll have our own Tour de France. And ASO said, no. Oh, sorry, you're not allowed to use that name. You may not use the name Tour de France. That's our name. So they effectively banned and blocked women from that race. There was a race that was around in the 90s and the early thousands called like the Grand Boucle, which is great. It means something in French, but it was not the name recognition of the Tour de France. And the fact that ASO had really rescinded those naming rights was very damaging to the progress of the women's sport. So to have La Course by Tour de France back and being our stepping stone to a bigger Tour de France was huge.
Yeah.
And that is the journey of how we got the first stage of women back. And it ran from 2014 through 2021 as La Course by Tour de France. And the upside is that it was 8 years strong. The bad side was that they failed to include numerous days. They just assumed the role of tokenism. Like, all right, we've got women at the Tour de France. It's one day. There you go. We're good. And that's all that matters. That's all it takes. And luckily, what was happening during that time was the media the athletes and the fans were like, this is not enough. It's not okay. We need more. And finally, thanks to Zwift, the sponsor that stepped up in 2022, saying we're going to sign a 3 or 4 year deal with you, and we are going to have a week long Tour
Yeah.
de France, which was awesome. I'm so thankful and grateful to everybody at Zwift. That's one sponsor coming in and creating a financial paradigm that gave us 7 days. Luckily, so for the upcoming 2025 race, it will be 9 stages,
Mhm.
which is amazing. So no shade at all ever on Zwift.
Yeah.
The problem is it's 9 stages and
Yeah.
it's not 21 stages. And it's still for two reasons. One is there needs to be more sponsorship. It shouldn't all be on Zwift's shoulders to make that happen. It's very expensive to have a
Yeah.
race that long. But the problem is it's still nine. It's still 1/3 of the men's race because ASO does not believe women can complete that
Yeah.
distance.
And it
That's
doesn't have the name either, right? It's still Tour de Femme.
Yes, it's still Tour de Femme. So we're happy that the name, it's actually Tour de France Femme.
Oh,
So
okay.
it is Tour de France Femme,
Okay.
which is great. So, but it often gets nicknamed Tour de Femme, but it's still Tour de France, TDFF. So we're happy about the name being there. But we are not happy at the very slow progress. So 2022, 2025, this will be its 4th year running, and it's gone from 7 days to 9 days. Okay, does this mean that we then have to wait, roughly what, another 10, 11 years
Yeah.
until it's equal? And this also, I see so many remnants of, we talked about how women will often hold themselves back. So we're seeing plenty of women. There are a number who will actually say, "Yeah, I want to race 21 days." But you have plenty of women who are saying, "Well, I don't know. I'm okay with it being 9." Because they have not yet been given the whole example of if you can see it, you can be it.
Right.
And they're only capable of 9. And
That's
that's
crazy to me because we see men capable of it. So why would a woman not be capable of it?
exactly, especially when science is on our side, proving
Right.
that women actually have more
Right.
endurance. So I'll joke all the time. I'll be like, give the men 9 days, give the women 21. That's actually more biologically
Right.
suited. But that's the joke part. The truth part is there is middle ground here. We could actually have a 2 week race for both men and women. If you're not going to give women 3 weeks, then give both sexes 2 weeks and have it be equal there. And then, of course, you hear the powers that be saying, oh, no, 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 we're not shortening the men's race to 2 weeks. I'm like, well, then why are you not elongating the women to 3 weeks? And they stammer and stammer. And because, oh, well, and they'll try to be like, oh, well, it's financially just too much. I'm like, let me tell you something, ASO. You already have the budget in place for the men's race. You can easily share that with the women. They're just creating their own they're putting up their own roadblocks,
Yeah.
and it's all there. And then the same thing that we have to say is very important. So the women have 9 days. The distances are still shorter than the men's for that same idea that the women can't possibly do the longer distances. And then here's the worst part. The prize money for the women is 29% of the men's prize money. And it's very, very important to say, some people will be like, yeah, but the men race longer. So of course there's more prize money. And I'm like, no, no, no. This is 9 days to 9 days.
Yeah.
If you go look at the prize money of the men, what they earn for the first 9 days, and you look at the women's, that's 29%. So it's not okay.
Right.
And ASO, well, we need more exposure, more sponsors. I'm like, no, dudes, you create the purse strings. So you're telling me you can't do that? You know, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're the ones who are in charge of that.
We're getting a little bit short on time, which is sad because I have like 100 million other questions to ask you. But let's switch course and talk a little bit about Homestretch Foundation and what you're doing there.
Yeah, so Homestretch Foundation really came about through my entire cycling experience of learning that there was so much inequity. What could we do? But I will start with this short story that I finally made it in pro cycling from the regional pro teams to the pro continental level and then to the world tour. And I get to the world tour, which is, the biggest, hardest races in Europe and throughout the world. And I was being paid very little, you know, not enough to sustain uh, the, cycling could be my only career.
Yeah.
So I had to pick up two other part-time jobs and work that around all of my training. And I'm thinking to myself, I just got here to the world tour and now I feel like I have to quit because I can't survive at the world tour level. And what was so crazy was that men at the world tour were being paid a base salary. They were being paid 50K, and at the minor league level of the Pro Conti Tour, men were being paid 35K. And the women at the World Tour did not have a base salary guarantee by the UCI, our cycling federation, and neither did uh, the Pro Continental. There's just nothing. So women were being terribly taken advantage of, where teams were saying, look, here's $10,000 for the entire year. If you don't sign a contract for this, we'll find someone who will. And then on top of the women, the managers, the directors, they were all receiving proper salaries. So it was this crazy indentured servitude,
Yeah.
barely a step up from slavery of what was going on. So it was just crazy that this was happening in the sport. And I said, we need to change this. We need to find a way to fight for an equal wage at the top. And in the meantime, what if there were a way that women who were struggling the way I was had a place where they could live and train for free? And wouldn't that make all the difference as we bridge this gap? And so Homestretch was born from something that I really wanted. And I found a business partner in 2015 who said, I see the vision of this, let's do it. And we got a house in Tucson, a livable, nice big house. And there was also a guest house. And I would manage Homestretch and live in the guest house, and in the main house, we would open applications for, 6 pro athletes to come in, and they had to apply. They already had to be seasoned athletes, at the World Tour or Pro Conti, or at least domestic elite level, look really struggling with that gender pay gap.
Yeah.
And it's now been 10 years. We have had 104 athletes through the program from 18 different countries and 7 Olympians. And it's been a really wonderful thing. And we're donor based. So people are donating so that Homestretch can cover things like, mortgages, rent, property taxes, depending on if we're in a house we own or we rent. And it's been amazing to see this work. And it's just to play that factor on a person's journey in pro cycling. But the biggest news is that we also lobbied for women's pay at the World Tour. The women are now being paid 5K minimum at the World Tour, but the majority of the teams recognize that they should be paid 50K and are stepping in to fill that difference.
Okay.
But where we are still struggling is at the Pro Continental, the minor league level of pro cycling. The women are not guaranteed a base salary, although the men are. And so we're pushing there because we're still seeing the same women being taken advantage of financially in the worst way.
Yeah.
So it's
not a
not
UCI
over.
change.
No, so I go back and forth with President Lepartien. I'm like, and his latest thing is like, we're going to make 2 levels of Pro Conti. I'm like, well, does one of them have a base salary? Oh, no, you have to take that up with the stakeholders. I'm like, no, dude, you're the president.
Right.
What you have to do is make this change. And he's stalling on that. But here's what's really criminal is that for a team to be recognized as a Pro Continental team, that team has to pay the UCI a licensing fee of like $25,000. So UCI is making money off of these teams and off of these riders, but the riders are not.
Right.
And that is, I use the term financial slavery for that, and that's exactly what's happening. So the UCI is benefiting, and these women are poor as stuff.
Right.
So not okay. Not
Right.
okay. So we're still pushing forward, and we hope that we will see some changes here.
Where do you get your funding for Homestretch?
Donors that we've had wonderful donors that are just, people who believe in the mission for women's equity when it comes to all things financial. We have a lot of Tucson donors, but we also have a lot of national and international donors, a lot of people who will match their corporate donations with, to donate. We have a few local companies that will also sponsor us so that we have like a doctor, a dentist, chiropractor, a gym that are on hand here in Tucson that donate their services to us. Um, but honestly, we don't have big financial corporate donors, and we always say we are more than happy if Red Bull or Burger King
Yeah.
wants to come in and say, we're happy to be Homestretch powered by Red Bull, for
Yeah.
example. So we're up for any corporation or even individual private donors that want to be part of this, whether with a name or without a name attached. We are up for it. Drop me a line. We're online at homestretchfoundation.org, and that would be amazing. So um, please just get in touch if you'd like to be a Homestretch partner. We'd love to have you.
Yes. For folks listening who are like, I would love to advocate for equality in cycling, whether that be gender equality or racial equality,
Yeah.
but they're also saying, I'm not a pro cyclist. I have a full-time job. I'm a mom, whatever, keeps their life very full. What advice would you have for them on how they can be involved and help?
Absolutely. I encourage anyone to get involved if they're feeling that internal call of, I want to do something. And much like I experienced, having a small committee, I got to say, like 4 people is great. Maybe a few more if necessary, but if you have 4 people that share the same vision as you and you can divide that workload equally, then that's the best way to go. So whether you want to target the pay gap or other areas of any sport, of anything, to have an idea of what is the sport doing wrong, who are the people involved in how we make this right, and it's usually at the federation level, and how can we start reaching out to them. I definitely say you can do this in small bites or a giant meal, either
Yeah.
way, depending on what works with your schedule. But the best thing you can do is first form a small committee of like-minded folks who want to help you with this, and then you delegate.
I've got
Yeah.
3 final quick questions for you.
Let's
But
hear them.
first, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like folks to know?
Oh, yeah, I think one of the biggest elements is when you're very passionate about a subject matter, whether it's, equality or whatever it is that, for me, I'll use that example because that's what I've been yabbering about. But if you're so passionate about it, you have to understand that fighting for change will often blur the lines of public and private. You're going to encounter people who push back. And it's one thing to push back professionally, but in this day and age, we see all sorts of trolling on social media. We see ignorance in all shapes and sizes, and it can sting when you get pushback for what you're fighting for. And so you will have to grow a thick skin or to find a way to have this roll off your back, in a way that just keeps that balance something that you're still positive about fighting for, even if it you might take some cuts, some hits along the way, and know that that's normal, and just brace for it and get ready to put on the proverbial armor.
Yeah.
And part of that is surrounding yourself with like-minded people, so that when all the trolls and the jerks step up to the mic, you feel protected from that because you have people who are on your side. I don't think I really fully knew how many people were not going to embrace change for, women's equity. And no
Yeah.
idea,
Yeah.
no idea. So be prepared for an education of your own. What seems so clear to you might not be to the rest of the world. But if your gut believes what it believes, then you keep going.
3 final questions. The first one is, what bike or bikes do you ride?
Oh, great. Yeah. I have a Cannondale Super 6 Evo. It is from 2016. It was my last bike in the pro scene, and I just love it. It fits so well. So it's like totally mechanical everything. There's not anything
Yeah,
digital on it, and I love it.
I love that.
Um, it's so great. It's so great. I also have an old Trek from the 2006 era. These are old bikes, right?
Yep.
I'm happy with them. I'm not racing anymore, so I'm staying on them.
I love that too. Just like the idea of sustainability, right? You don't get
Yes.
rid of it if it still works.
Yep.
Second question is, where's your favorite place you've ever ridden your bike?
My favorite place is the island of Nevis. on St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean. We'll have to do another podcast about why that island is so important to me. But I love it. I have a contingent of cycling family that are on Nevis. So if you get a chance, explore Nevis by bike. I love it.
Third question and final question is what is your favorite thing about riding your bike?
My favorite thing now that I am a fully retired pro cyclist, and I don't have a computer on the bike and I don't have to do intervals. My favorite thing with riding my bike is just going out for a 2 hour spin and enjoying the day, enjoying the wind through my helmet. I often ride with a young woman named Ava, who's 13. I supposedly mentor her, but I think she mentors me right back. And we go out and we ride along the bike path loop here in Tucson, and we just have the best time. And like to me, that's the win. Just being on your bike and loving it.